Hampton Court Palace is considered to have been one of England's most haunted buildings. It's a palace which is synonymous with the Tudor period, with Henry VIII and his brutal reign over England. Henry is most famously known for his 6 wives, and all of them stayed there at some point. But there have been many reports from workers and visitors at the palace of strange occurrences and possible hauntings. It's up to you whether you believe in ghosts or hauntings, but what is the history behind these alleged ghosts and the spectres that are claimed to still remain at Hampton Court Palace? So join us today as we look at the ghosts of Hampton Court, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Hampton Court Palace is really 2 palaces combined into one. You have at the front the Tudor Palace, the building which was begun by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry VIII's chief minister. This was his palace, but it was then given to the king, following Wolsey's downfall. But the palace went on to become Henry VIII's most favourite residence, and he enlarged it and his wife would spend huge sums of money updating it. In particular, this is evident in the palace's Great Hall, with the initials of Henry and his queen Jane Seymour intertwined on the ceiling, but they previously had the initial A for Anne Boleyn, who spent large amounts of money on the palace before she was beheaded inside the Tower of London. After dark, many of the guards and wardens of the palace have stories and recollections of strange occurrences happening there. There are many accounts of ghosts at the palace, but who allegedly are these figures that still haunt the spectacular building? Jane Seymour was the 3rd wife and queen of Henry VIII. The pair, it's alleged, fell in love whilst the king was married to Anne Boleyn, and it's claimed that Anne once caught Jane sitting on her husband's knee, which caused her to have a furious rage that brought on a miscarriage. It was said this child was a boy, and the boy who Henry would greatly wish for. But Henry later married Jane after Anne's execution, and she was known for being gentle and quiet, unlike the previous wives of King Henry. Jane, while she stayed at Hampton Court, shunned the grandeur and spectacular banquets that her predecessors held, but instead she cut back on her court spending and extravagance. But it was within Hampton Court Palace that Jane Seymour would give birth to the heir and successor to Henry's throne. She went into confinement at the palace in September 1537, with only those distinguished enough allowed to enter, and on the 12th of October, inside of Hampton Court, she gave birth to the future Edward VI at 2 o'clock in the morning. But Jane Seymour would never really leave Hampton Court alive. Her son Edward was christened, but Jane's labour was incredibly difficult, and following the christening, it was clear she was not well. On the 24th of October 1537, she died at Hampton Court. Henry VIII wore black for the next 3 months, but there is a belief that Jane's ghost haunts the place where she gave birth and passed away. It's said that a pale figure appears on a stairway, which once led to the room where Jane gave birth and died. It's believed that Jane appears on the anniversary of her death and wanders down the stairs and out into Clock Court, carrying a candle towards her son Edward's room in Hampton Court. She is allegedly seen walking opposite the astronomical clock. What makes Jane's story even more bizarre is the fact, despite not being buried at Hampton Court, as her body was laid to rest at Windsor Castle, her heart was buried, along with other internal organs, somewhere underneath the high altar in the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court. This adds an eerie take onto Jane's story. Another one of Henry VIII's queens experienced turmoil and downfall while she was at Hampton Court. Katherine Howard was a young teenage 5th wife of the king, who it's believed had an affair behind the king's back with one of his closest advisors and friends, Thomas Culpeper. Catherine's betrayal was facilitated by Lady Jane Boleyn, and it was discovered by Thomas Cranmer, who then investigated it and discovered the affairs she had been having. It was at Hampton Court that Katherine was arrested and locked up under guard inside her own apartments. She was then held there to await her execution, but she managed somehow to breach her guards, and she ran towards the Chapel Royal, screaming her head off. She was screaming and was terrified of what would come, and she ran along the gallery outside the Chapel Royal, screaming for her husband. She knew that with the accusations put before her, then she would be killed, but while she was screaming, her husband was inside the chapel, just beyond the doors, where she was then apprehended by the guards. It was inside the chapel where Henry VIII was told of his wife's betrayal, where he was handed a note informing him of her adultery. The guards dragged her away and back to her quarters before she began the journey to the Tower of London, where she passed under the heads of the men she had slept with. She was then beheaded by the commoner's axe inside the tower's walls, but Catherine's ghost is claimed to haunt the gallery outside the royal pew in the chapel often, and it's claimed that just as she reaches the royal pew, she lets out an unearthly shriek and hurries back towards the top of the stairs with a ghastly look of despair. Also, a ghostly hand, it's claimed, wearing a ring, has emerged from behind the curtains there, and some visitors to the palace have suddenly felt cold, and some have even fainted in the gallery. It's believed that this is the ghost of Katherine Howard, who remains trapped in the palace and wishes to beg for her life and to be spared by her husband the king, but this obviously never occurred. Another ghost reported is allegedly that of Sybil Penn. During the reign of Elizabeth I, Sybil died from smallpox, and she is regarded as the Grey Lady who haunts the palace. She was a servant to 4 Tudor monarchs, regularly being based at Hampton Court, and was also the wet nurse to King Edward VI. She was also known for helping Elizabeth I recover from her smallpox, but shortly after Elizabeth got better, Sybil died from the disease. She was buried at Hampton Church, close to the palace, but her tomb was disturbed during the 1800s, following a great storm that hit London. But after this, it's claimed that she came back to the palace, and shortly after, the family who lived at the palace, and in some of the rooms, claimed that some mysterious things were happening. People were being woke up with cold feelings on their face, and sights of a Grey Lady walking around the palace grounds were reported, along with the sound of a spinning wheel. Princess Frederica of Hanover described the ghost as a tall, gaunt figure, dressed in a long grey robe, with a hood on her head and her lanky hands outstretched before her. What is interesting is the sound of the spinning wheel, as a sealed chamber was found behind a wall inside the palace during renovation works, and inside this room was an old spinning wheel. The Grey Lady was even reported by Victorian soldiers. One disturbing part of the palace's history is that during the English Civil War, a number of people were executed there. In 1871, the remains of 2 males were found in shallow graves, found under a cloister in the Fountain Court, during renovation. To one person living at the palace, the discovery was a significant relief, as the elderly woman who lived nearby in an apartment had been terrorised for a while, with knockings on the walls. No one believed her, but when the men were reinterred elsewhere, the activity did not continue. It's considered that these 2 men were victims of the slaughter by the Roundheads during the Civil War, and had been buried quickly during the building of the Baroque Palace. It was said by the elderly woman that stupid Board of Works has at last found the 2 wretched men who have been haunting me for years. But it's not just ghostly women who have been reported at the palace. A number of animals have also been reported, including a phantom dog and a cat. The dog was reported by the staff at the palace in the 1990s, and it was said that it was heard a lot on the King's staircase and also in William III's apartments. Queen Victoria banned dogs at the palace, except for her lapdogs, and it's believed one of them could be haunting the palace, and cats have also been reported in Clock Court. But are there really hauntings and ghosts at Hampton Court? What is interesting is to consider that all these figures mentioned have grounds in the palace in history. Each of them are linked to the story of Hampton Court, and many of them had tragic, devastating and shocking deaths and downfalls. The most shocking ghost that allegedly haunts is Katherine Howard, with her screaming white figure running down the gallery outside the chapel. But there is something to consider with regards to the ghosts at the palace. Many stories of ghosts and phantoms and strange goings-on emerged during the Victorian times, and it was here where Gothic ideas and stories came to the forefront. Some people believe that there are ghosts at Hampton Court, but one possible explanation for the ghost sightings may come from the grace and favour residents that lived at the palace. From the Georgian period, people who served the king or the country, for example in a military role, were given shelter and a home in part of Hampton Court. If these residents did not like their apartments, then they could have made up ghost stories to get a better apartment inside of the palace. It's up to you whether you believe the ghosts of Hampton Court Palace or not. It's interesting to consider the history of one of England's most historic palaces. It's a captivating place to visit, but one thing to consider is the footage online, which came out in 2003, of a robed hooded figure opening a fire door at the palace. You can watch this online, and I'd love to see what you think of this. But today Hampton Court is still one of the greatest palaces across England, and is a beautiful building that's definitely worth a visit. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.